Oh no, the potential that Everson Griffin signs with the Packers and Dalvin Cook doesn't show up for the Vikings? What a disaster. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. That's the right page. Grossi. And yes, we already talked about Everson Griffin, which was not today's scheduled video. Now let's get to the other Vikings talk, which is all about Dalvin Cook. Now, this Dalvin Cook saga has been heating up as of late. Back in the beginning of June, Adam Schefter reported that Dalvin Cook would not be participating in any team activities unless he received a reasonable deal, of course alluding to his upcoming potential contract extension. Cook is currently scheduled to be an unrestricted free agent after this season, and so he's basically saying, hey, I want to get paid, and if you don't pay me, I ain't gonna show up. So for the past few weeks, he has missed out on all of these virtual team meetings and really hasn't been participating at all. Then fast forward to this past Saturday, the 25th, and when Mike Zimmer was asked specifically about Dalvin Cook, he said that Cook would be reporting to camp. And when the reporter said, well, how do you know that? He said, Dalvin Cook told me. And so we were like, oh, okay, I guess this holdout is not going to last much longer. However, following that comment, Cook's agent then tweeted out congratulating Zimmer on his extension, but was unsure why he said anything about Dalvin Cook reporting because that was just blatantly untrue. So right off the bat, you had Mike Zimmer saying, yes, my star running back is going to be reporting to camp. And then you had that star running back's agent say, nope, not really sure why you're saying that, bud. But it gets even spicier because later that evening on Saturday, Tom Pelissero reported that Cook told running backs coach Kennedy Palomalu that he planned on being at training camp, who then told Zimmer, which is why Zimmer made that comment. And so at that moment, we go, okay, so what happened was Dalvin Cook talked to Coach Palomalu, who then told Mike Zimmer that he would be reporting to camp, even though the agent said, nay, never told Mike Zimmer that. So then Dalvin Cook's agent came out after that comment about an hour later and clarified that while Dalvin Cook and Coach Palomalu have a very good relationship, they talk often, Dalvin Cook never mentioned anything about reporting to camp, and that was 11:06 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. And this brings us to today, the day before training camp, in which nobody knows if Dalvin Cook is actually going to show up. Now, financially and logically, it would make sense for Dalvin Cook to show up because the new CBA that was passed this past year is really unkind towards holdouts. So under the new CBA, players may be fined up to $50,000 a day, every single day that they miss, and they would lose out on this season counting towards their contract, meaning that even though this is his last year on the Vikings before he becomes an unrestricted free agent, if he doesn't play, this would not count towards that contract. And so next year, if he just sat out the entire year, not only would he lose a ton of money, but he would actually still be a restricted free agent on the Vikings and would most likely still have to play for them. So really for Dalvin Cook, this is a lose across the board. I know he's trying to gain some leverage to get a new contract, but it seems that the days of Le'Veon Bell or Melvin Gordon are pretty much over, that the new CBA is not really going to help out the players in these scenarios. So in sum, Dalvin Cook would basically be sitting out for nothing. Now, while I was doing research, there was an article that I found that was talking about how Dalvin Cook could potentially cheat the system a little bit. So ESPN's Dan Graziano reported that players were told on an NFLPA call that if they were on the Week 1 roster and played one game, it would count as an entire season. So basically, if they play one game, then great, wonderful, this year counts. So theoretically, I thought Dalvin Cook could show up to camp and he basically could play week 1 against the Packers and then be like, okay, I'm dipping now. And so I was a bit confused by this, so what I did is I reached out to ESPN's Dan Graciano myself, and I clarified, if you had a player that wanted to hold out for a better contract, could they just come in, play week 1, and then say, okay, I'm gone, this counted as my year, I'm an unrestricted free agent next year? And Dan very nicely responded saying, no, that's not how this works, so that article was wrong. He basically said that this scenario, meaning that if a player just plays week 1, is on that week 1 roster, it counting for this season, only happens if the season is canceled because of COVID. So basically what Dalvin Cook's options are is that 1, he can sit out this season, in which he's going to lose a ton of money. And on top of that, it's not going to actually count towards his contract. So that kind of doesn't make any sense. He could report and basically play on. And if the season got canceled at any point, then it would count towards his contract and he would be an unrestricted free agent next year. Or the final thing is that he gets extended by the Minnesota Vikings team. But basically, Dalvin Cook is running out of time to make his decision, as they have to report tomorrow to camp. If I was a betting man, I would imagine that Dalvin Cook is going to report, because as I've mentioned, it really doesn't make any sense. If he was able to sit out and he just lost a ton of money, but it still counted towards his contract, then I'd say, yeah, then there's potential that he does sit out. And while Aaron Jones is not sitting out this year, these NFLPA rules are pretty important, because it shows that if Aaron Jones just plays a couple games, he's on that week 1 roster, and then the season gets canceled, he's an unrestricted free agent and can walk away from the Green Bay Packers next year. So that was a question I had for a while, of what happens to those guys who are on the final years of their contract if the season does get canceled. Well, it seems that if they play at least one game and they're on the roster week 1, then it just counts. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this winds up shaking out with Dalvin Cook, because even if he plays an entire season, I wonder if him not getting an extension is just going to create too much turmoil within the team, and he's just going to walk out of there next year anyway. And I mean, he's a huge part of their offense. He made the Pro Bowl last year, had over 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. And when Dalvin Cook was on, that team was much better for it. Now, you could make the argument that they do have some pretty decent backups that you've seen a little bit of, but I think Dalvin Cook is a much needed addition to that Vikings offense. And if he were to leave, that would just be devastating. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think Dalvin Cook is going to re-sign with the Vikings? Do you think he's going to hold out? Let me know what you think. Also, Raheem Mostert restructured his contract with the 49ers. 2020 has struck again, so he can make up to $5 million, 2.5 in bonuses this year. So yeah, he'll still be there when we play the 49ers later this season. Great. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy on all social media. See down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the patrons over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy and the YouTube members. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Bad Go.